Welcome. Well, let me officially welcome you to the fourth and final installment of the Child Abuse Prevention Month webinar series. And if you've been with us before, if you've attended any of the previous sessions, why don't you select a reaction for me at the bottom of your screen? In your toolbar, you should see a reactions option. I'm always curious to know. Oh, wonderful. We are so excited that you are here. And please note at the end of this session, so in about a few days, we will provide a follow-up email. It's about 2 days or so. That follow-up email will have a recording to today's session, some of the incredible resources that will be discussed today, but also a link to view the previous sessions if you missed them. So with that, I want to welcome you and say hello and good morning. My name is Jessica Matley. I am a training coordinator representing the California Training Institute, but our friends know us as Caltrin. We are one of OCAP's grant-funded organizations, and we're so grateful to be here. I've been honored to serve as your host and moderator throughout the series. This series was brought to you with a partnership, not just Caltrin, but also the Child Abuse Prevention Center, who is here with us as well on the panel, CDSS, and of course, the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. If you haven't had a moment yet, we would love for you to drop into the chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to know what organization you're with and what county you're visiting from as well. Today's session, the majority of our time is going to be spent with your presenter, who is Corey B. Best. We are so excited to have the discussion and really kind of around this topic of racial justice as prevention. So what I would like to do is give you a few notes about the session, and then we'll jump into the presenter. This session is being recorded. A copy of this recording and note-taking slides, such as the PowerPoint slides, if you will not only be provided in the follow-up email, but in the chat, we're also going to drop them so that you can follow along with today's discussion. Not only will we provide a copy of the PowerPoint and the recording, but also recordings from the previous sessions as well. There will also be a discussion, maybe a mention Corey will make about a podcast that he has called Mining for Gold, in which we will provide, I believe, a few episode examples for you. I think the actual podcast is audio nuggets, but I'm sure he will clarify that for me. So without much delay, let me jump into to introducing our presenter today, because we are so excited for today's topic. So let me tell you a little bit about Corey. Corey B. Best is a Black father, community organizer, activist, and leader. Originally from Washington, D.C., Corey now resides in Florida. Corey has attached himself to Justice Doing, which is a movement and never-ending journey of being guided by the principled struggle to advance racial justice and use abolitionist technologies to construct a new way of working as one. In all of his endeavors, Corey brings a deepened historical and contemporary analysis of the invention of race, racism, systems of oppression, and how those systems interconnect to produce white advantage gaps. Corey founded Mining for Gold in 2020. Mining for Gold is part of the larger movement that is in the active pursuit of racial justice, liberation, and freedom. The idea for Mining for Gold is directly influenced by the 405 years of racialized arrangement in our communities, and that we all have pieces of metaphorical gold flowing within us. The mantra is, sometimes we must sift through pounds of dirt to find an ounce of gold. As a practice and discipline, Mining for Gold is held accountable to holding gathering spaces with communities and institutions and is rooted in justice-centered culture, building the most effective strategy to achieve relational and communal health. Mining for Gold launched the Liberated Voice Exchange in 2022. The Liberated Voice Exchange is the home of Audio Nuggets podcast, the Mining for Gold Cipher. In this all-Black container, we witness and experience how traveling the stony road toward freedom is a journey tracked with love, resistant abolitionism, dignity, and revolutionary muse makers. When one has eavesdropped on the political analysis, they've come to know that on Audio Nuggets, we strive to bend the arc on nonlinear modes through conversations that tug and pull from the best of who we are. We give ourselves rooted permission to tell a collective story of principled struggle for liberation. So with that, Corey, we want to say good morning and thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and good morning to you all. I really appreciate and humbled by that bio. I usually ask folks just to say the name and get to it. So as you were reading, I was like, who is that guy she's talking about? So before we really dive in, and anyone who's out there in the ecosystem who's seen me speak or are in partnership with me, you probably are saying, like, how the hell is Corey going to stand still and sit down for 50 minutes in a webinar? I'm going to practice and you'll see me shift just so I can get grounded. And speaking of grounded, I want to invite you all to just sit, to notice where your feet are. We won't go through a meditation, but I want to invite you as we embark upon this journey today, understanding that racial justice is prevention. And I'm going to present some evidence to tell you that we might need to go a few levels down to get rooted so that we know exactly the problem that we're trying to solve for. Oftentimes we think about solutions. So today, I will provide an invitation so that we can excavate the root, so that we are able to contextualize racial trauma from the historical, not ahistorical perspective. And I'll also frame a few things from an abolitionist point of view that helps us understand exactly what justice is. Before I do all of that, and that's 405 pounds, 405 years, I should say, of information we're going to try to cram in and grapple with and disentangle in 35 to 50 minutes. I'm hoping to leave some time for questions. If there aren't any questions, I didn't do something right. So give me some questions. I won't fill those while I'm speaking with you, but I will try to leave some time to tap into where your heart's beating and to see if we can make some sense of things that may be um, challenging or even positive for you. So I'm hoping to, one, affirm some folk today. And that means, folk that may not be identified as white, or folk who do identify as white and abolitionist or as white and anti-racist. And most importantly, I want to affirm for those who are working within carceral systems, doing the work on the ground with families who are in oppressed bodies. I want to affirm that we see you, that I see you, that I understand the challenges. So, right off the top, I want you to know that this is an examination of whiteness, not only focused on what has happened to Black and Brown bodies, but also in strategizing with history, I also make sure that I tap into the root of these causes that has us focused on symptoms at this point. And in order to do that with me, I'm going to introduce you to a concept from mindfulness of race, and that comes from Ruth King. And it's a simple concept of RAIN. So think about the acronym RAIN, RAIN. The R is for recognize, the A is for allow, the I is for investigate, and the N is for nurture. So as I'm having this conversation with you, historically, I know that there have been some tensions in conversations about race and racism. So when you're recognizing those tensions, understand what might be happening to you, what's obvious for you in the moment, and practice noticing and naming what those things might be. You can also take this as just one technique for justice doing after the webinar is over. As you're working with your ecosystem and your groups, think about RAIN so that we're constantly building the dream muscle, and we're also building fortitude to withstand and endure some of the racial trauma that we're all experiencing. And then now on to A, which is allow. So can I be with, right? Ask yourself, can I be with what's happening without interference, without judgment, without interpretations, without preferences. Corey, say it another way, or why'd you have to say abolition, or resistance to the fact that really what I'm, and if you could understand this in one sentence, then the webinar is over. What I'm what I'm fighting for is collective love, right? I'm not fighting against a white dominant system because I'm going to lose that. I'm fighting for love, collective love, radical care. And in order to do that, I got to understand that there's some messiness here. We are all enthralled in some yuck, bottom line, but I'm still able to glimpse freedom because of brave souls like you. So please don't think this an attack on your individuality or your identity. But please know there's been some things poured into us, and we have consented, and we've actually daily made choice to say yes to punishment, to say yes to carcerality, to say yes to racism. All of us in one way or another. And so we must begin to go with the eye in rain and investigate. What am I perceiving? How am I relating to what's happening? What racial views and how has my entry points tainted my views of humanity and my belief system? And also, as you're investigating while you're sitting here with us for 40 some odd minutes, think about what's fueling your stress and take responsibility for your own feelings. It's not the webinar host's fault. It's not Corey's fault. Corey's trying to provide some information. So let's take responsibility if we feel challenged in any way, right? Let's not use exit ramps and bypasses to say that Corey made me angry. I think my mama and your mama told you that can't nobody make you jump off no bridge. Think about that sometime. And we nurture in rain. We nurture. How do I care and attend to cast and release race-related stress and let go? And what is there? What is there for me to learn? And that's where I'll continue. Again, racial justice is prevention. And what I've learned in reviewing the previous webinars, and you also who've attended these, you may have discovered a through line that justice seeking that is fueled with a historical knowing. I've seen and witnessed some of the presenters oppose state violence, reclaiming humanity at the intersections of struggles, not only at the intersection of identity, toward a self-determined life that would lead to experiencing an abundant world. Follow me, an abundant world without carceral ethos and punishment as the preferred mode of operation. What should be most obvious if you have attended this amazing series is that we have several tensions to hold and grapple. Anti-poverty, as Shamika provided us with, requires rooted examination of what occurrences created conditions for millions of families to remain unhoused without adequate child care, health care, education, livable income, etc., all while fighting to prove their humanity to state agents that seek to regulate, dictate what they deem, I should say, what they deem best for their communities and families. As I review the previous session's objectives, I'm able to see that they've served me as a reminder of what our collective really craves. And that reminder is a longing for justice. At MFG, we say justice, what we mean is an acknowledgement of one's humans, proactively pursuing healing systemic harm while repairing fractured relationships from the past, equity of voice and personhood, moving with the recognition and awareness so that people are seen and able to contribute to the positive social impact, justice as we see it at Mining for Gold is supporting one another to build trust and empathy through holding ourselves accountable to embodied anti-racism. This doesn't mean declarative or declared anti-racism. Said another way, real recognizes real. We need to walk the talk and we have to embody that. And trust me, when I say we, I'm talking about me too, right? I am no expert at anything but learning how to become better than I was the day before. I'm an expert at practicing and failing hard at getting better. That's what I'm expert at, failing hard and getting better. I'm an expert at recognizing that bad things happen, and sometimes we blame the wrong thing for those bad things. That's what I'm expert on, asking lots of questions. Why are things the way they are? And why is it that our systems and our institutions are well equipped to focus on individual challenges without understanding the full magnitude of 405 years of colonization, theft of land, enslavement, universal Christianity, cis heteropatriarchy? We must strategize with history. I'd like for everyone to take just a 5-second pause and locate yourself on this timeline. When did your creator, your mama, your papa, when were you birthed into this world? When were you birthed into this world? What is your entry point in understanding our America? This is a quick timeline to show you that one, my peoples have been or were legally enslaved much longer than we have been legally freed and also legally deemed as human beings. What do I mean by legally deemed as human beings? Well, we've always known we were human. Stokely Carmichael says that the 64 legislation was a piece of paper that had to tell white people that we were human. We knew we were human, but the law, the ideology, society, the invention of race said that my peoples and my people's peoples, even though we built and created all sorts of mechanisms in these Americas, we were deemed as inhuman. So this attempt at deeming folk less than, check one, good people, for what we're trying to prevent. That is violence. Number one goal, we're going to prevent dehumanizing individuals so that we won't perpetuate violence. We're taught, or when we're taught about our country, we're not taught to think about the violence that stems from European imperialism, domination, forced separation, racial caste, and segregation. When we're taught about violence prevention, we're taught that the cops and the systems keep us safe. When we're taught about interventions, we're taught about to start at the symptom, not the root of environmental and historical occurrences that promote violence. When we're taught about crime, we're also taught about punishment. Brian Stevenson asserts that there's evidence that slavery didn't end, it only evolved. And this evolution is peculiar because you may not see this as a data presentation. I see it as data / evidence to support Brian Stevenson's assertion and his scholarship. He says that it evolved through kidnapping. See, in these Americas, one thing that's peculiar when it comes to anti-Black slavery or enslavement is that my ancestors were stripped from culture, religion, structure, even language, and were unable for quite the number of centuries to reclaim that communal way of being. And so the tension becomes that white supremacy, of course, is a lie, but it is a well and live at the same time. And so there's a great conundrum when we're stripped from our families and that legacy lingers in 2024. See, when racial terror started at the kidnapping in West Africa and then erupted in a very peculiar, barbaric way here in the 13 colonies, we see that racial terror and fear of the oppressor lingers on into 2024. We see that in the 60s, where we had legalized segregation, we've always lived in segregated communities, but that we live even more segregated in 2024. So, this evolution, good people, is kidnapping, racial terror, segregation, incarceration, and forcibly removing children from their families are all legacies. So even before we had formal police officers, we had slave patrols, which grew an ideology that we had to punish people and that Black bodies, especially, and brown bodies and indigenous bodies, and even in the dear West Coast, Asian, Chinese, Japanese bodies had to be excluded and were only good for war. See, America is cunning and baffling, and then we call folk certain things like a model minority. I think you people know what I'm talking about, but it is an examination of this attempt to strip us of our humanity. And Joy DeGruy says that the biggest assault of the invention of race and racism is the assault on the relationships that we could have had with each other. Because believe me, we know that race is an invention and the ideology of racism comes before race. Right? So we needed that ideology to justify racial terror, segregation, and incarceration. So we must disentangle race and racism, disentangle poverty from racism, othering from dehumanization. James Baldwin suggests that we cannot change what we fail to see. And it is in this seeing, it is in this seeing, it is in this knowing that we find ourselves confronted with a choice. Do we consent to state sanctioned violence or not? Are we working to dismantle a cage that we can no longer survive in or not? Are we squarely facing ourselves and our belief systems to change them or not? And are we taking responsibility for our role in perpetuating violence as state actors or not? This timeline says it clearly. And today, on April 24th, 1877, was the end of Reconstruction as we knew it. What do I mean by that, and why is it important? I want to pull out three things here from this timeline just to show the importance and also the ideology that lingers today. So after those 12 years of political freedom, and yes, patriarchy was rampant because Black men of the day got to vote first before women of all racial categories. But after 12 years of holding political office and also needing federal troops in the lower southern states to protect courthouses, Reconstruction was abolished. Freedom was abolished. And I think that today we think abolition is a scary word. Well, we've been doing a lot for a lot of the wrong things for quite a long time. We did abolish the institution of slavery in 1865. And again, 12 years later, Black men specifically were deemed savages. You all have seen them. the postcards started to come up in this era. And also with the end of Reconstruction, we move into the second thing I want to flag here because it's really important and it shapes our ideology and how our political, social, and economic contracts have never been honored for Black and Brown bodies. And that is in 1869, Homer Plessy, right? Lost state Supreme Court, separate but equal. So that when Plessy took that all the way to the Supreme Court, Honorable Ferguson embedded and codified this notion that Black bodies were not equal to white bodies. And he also codified what was already happening from 1877, what was already happening, I should say, from 1865 until 1869, and that was 100 years of legalized Jim Crow laws. And we know what happened in that era is where we started to see a whole lots of lynching. Now, I want to pull that piece out just a little bit to show a variable as to why we remain silent when Black bodies and brown bodies and poor white bodies are being annihilated today. Children of the 60s are leaders of our institutions today. Arbitrarily speaking, let's imagine that the last known legal lynching, let's pause on that. How can I even part my lips to say legal lynching? Think about that for 1 second. Legal lynching. Children who witnessed those lynchings. I believe in humanity, good people. And I believe that what I know about history is that many Black folk did not hang around and watch their friends and their families get lynched for all the things I've already named, racial terror being one of them. And so there were lots of white children watching, witnessing lynching. And I do believe that they said, Mama. See, they only called mama or auntie because remember, patriarchy reigns superior. White cisgen patriarchy reigns superior. It was daddy's work to be done, so mama and the kids watched daddy do his work. I mean, that's a hell of a bring your child to work day, I would say. And while children are at work with daddy, watching daddy do what he does to criminals who needed supervision, containment, and punishment, for over 70% of those crimes were bunk. But where I'm going is that white children witnessed lynchings in the 60s, and when they said, Mama, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why are we burning this man? Why are we hanging this man? Why are we cutting parts of this man's body for souvenirs on daddy's basement mantle? Mommy, why are we doing this? The child, with all of her humanity, the child was told to sit quietly, eat the damn sandwich, drink the Coca-Cola over burning flesh, by the way, and you say nothing because daddy said they deserved it. As recent as the 60s, good people, I'm born in 73. As recent as the 60s, good people, we have a whole couple of generations of young bodies of young white bodies that witnessed this annihilation, and they were taught never to say anything to anybody. Makes me beg the question, and this is something that I want my white brothers and sisters to really think about. What has racism cost you? See, this ideology, this ideology that I am going to put plain in your sight is not one that has only impacted black and brown, non-cisgen people. This ideology has allowed people to remain silent and suffer in silence because there were laws against white bodies even standing for justice. Can we imagine that? Laws that said, no, no, no. You white bodies can never stand for black people. And if you did, based on this invention of race, whiteness becomes a ledge you get thrown from, not that you grow to. And that's what's happening to our poor white families as well. Whiteness is a flimsy reed, but it means very little when you fall out of that standard. You date outside of your race, you sniff a line of cocaine, you drink too much, you become poor and don't do what the standard says. Oh my. What a conundrum we find ourselves in. And here we are talking about services and programs. And we have yet to excavate the root of what's really ailing us. We all walk, live, attempt to breathe the best we can in contaminated air and on blood-soaked land. We have a lot of trauma that we have not even touched a little bit. And then we get mad when Corey Best and other activists say the truth. The truth doesn't have an agenda, I saw somewhere yesterday. I'm only a messenger and I'm also impacted just like you are. And my experiences may have been different, but I know the same ideology that you suffer from, I suffer from. Excuse me. All to say, good people, next month, we're 70 years past Brown v. Board of Education, where if you know anything about history, you should have known that segregated schools was a legacy and a relic of the institution of enslavement. So when we passed the 13th Amendment, that should have been abolished as well. There should have never been segregated schools, period. Right? But this is where federal and state really play in collusion to uphold the state violence that we fail to look at. And we're only 60 years past the passage of the Civil Rights Act, not even 60 yet. In July, it'll be 60. And what I want to say when it comes back to love and humanity is that we do not need to see another piece of violence before we make change, because if you know anything about your own history, it wasn't until 2020 when we witnessed George Floyd's brutal lynching in public that many of us became activated again. And it was in 63 when Kennedy got killed. We saw what happened with Medgar Evers. We saw what happened with Martin Luther King when all the rights, the voting rights was passed after that. We do not need another black body being annihilated in our eyes, in our faces before we make change. The question becomes, what are you saying yes to when it comes to justice? Secret people, I'm not preaching at you, I'm having a conversation with you. And I hope you embrace the conversation, because some of the questions that I'm asking you, I'm asking myself daily. What the hell? I wish my truths weren't right, good people. I wish it was a bunch of opinions I was giving you, good people. Then I would take the ass whoopings that you got to give me. but I'm giving you historical fact, and I still know that at the end of this call, it really ain't gonna change too much unless you get activated. I can't activate you. You have to activate yourself. The information is here. The information is right here. Look at the slide for just a moment. And as you do, just know that since the 60s, white supremacy ideology has attempted, this is an attempt, have not succeeded. And I think that the thin veil of that ideology is being peeled back every time one of you raise your hand, every time you ask a question, every time you have a conversation, every time you ask a question about, is this changing the material conditions for people? Are we perpetuating in violence? Haven't we always known from a cop perspective that chokeholds were bad? Why did we need Eric Garner to prove that to us? Haven't we always known that separating children from their families was really traumatic? Why did we need research to tell us that? Haven't we always known that some of the practices, services, and programs that we give people are bullshit? Haven't we known that for a long time? I said some, not all, good people. Some, not all. Haven't we known that? Haven't we sat in our cars on the ride home saying, I just don't know what to do. My boss ain't hearing me. Haven't we said that for a long time? We have done our own examination of these systems and institutions. And we know full well we don't want to be a part of failing in somebody else's life. We'd rather fail in our own than to hurt and suppress other people. But something just keeps us coming back to that. And these are the questions that I am rattling my brain with my comrade. Because since the 60s, white supremacist ideology has attempted to manufacture our consent by promoting multiculturalism. From 63, we were able to say nigger full on in an office building, and in 64, erased all of that as if we just forgot how we utilize that term in discrimination. We also fell into color blindness. We don't see race, so therefore racism doesn't exist. All of these things we tried to do to cover up, and nobody asked us to do that, right? It's amazing. It's only recent as the 60s that we started to see sovereignty laws where people couldn't talk and stand up for black and brown bodies and all of these things. But it's relatively a new phenomenon that we're consenting to laws and policies. We want to follow the law and policy that says don't talk about race, don't talk about sex or gender or identity. But we don't want to follow the policy, the statutory requirements that says treat people like human beings. And if you follow the protocol, maybe you wouldn't remove, maybe you wouldn't need this service, maybe you wouldn't place this child in that way, or maybe you wouldn't police that family. If we read the 139 pages of our policies internally, maybe we wouldn't be in this conversation. But we pick and choose the laws we want to follow, and they're all somewhat arbitrary and have no science to them. And then if we really look at it hard, it's maintaining what dominance in our society. See, the moment that they said don't say gay here in Florida and don't say woke in all other academic institutions across this country, people wipe their hands of it. Oh, it's law now. We can't say it. You pick and choose. You consent to this. James Baldwin says it's easy to fire one person. It's harder to fire 100. I'm not telling you good people to lose your jobs because we don't need more poor white people. I'm just telling you to work differently, or I'm encouraging you to work differently. Since the 60s, again, we've tried to services and goods and multiculturalism and play colorblind and thinking that that got us out of racism. And I'm not talking about racism at the level of just calling me discriminatory names. I'm talking about big macro thinking here that's going to require you to think beyond myopia. I'm talking about race as an invention, plus the prejudice that's baked into all of these policies and occurrences that you see on this slide, plus abuse of power that equals racism. And it has no need for you to like the ideology or to dislike the ideology. It is rolling sophisticated as it is right now. And a lot of us, no matter what body we're in, we're trying to disrupt it. And we're also dependent on the same institution we want to dismantle for bread and butter at the end of the day. It is a conundrum, good people, and we need to see it as such. There's no easy way out. There won't be an easy way out. Every action toward dismantling it is a step. So redefine your definition of action. Don't think that when you're in a training and people are talking about it, that it's just talk. You can always find solutions for where you fit into this ecosystem through conversation. And these messages, though, these messages have been embedded in our psyche, and our defaults are to see the other as something that needs to, again, be supervised, controlled, criminalized, and punished, creating not a black and brown disparity. And I think Jessica said this in the introduction. This is not only about a black and brown disparity. If you look at this image with an accurate view and an accurate way of framing it, you'll see that the image, and you'll notice that we're talking about making sense of the white advantage gap. We talk well about black and brown disparities, but we don't talk a lot about what is it in our DNA that continues to advantage white bodies over all other bodies. One reason is because of the invention of whiteness. And when you think about the invention of whiteness, this is at the intersection of identities here, good people. When you think about the invention of whiteness, you see that all other oppressed identities are categorized as a deviation from cisgen maleness, from sanguine, inventive, pristine, sophisticated, educated, rich, able-bodied whiteness. This is violence that we have yet to prevent or even reckon with, is what I am asserting here. And it shows up philosophically and structurally. This results in systemic abuse, often under the guise of benevolent protection, excuse me, and public safety. I could spend a full day right here with you on this American dream game. My invitation for this is to go back to RAIN and jot down, notice, and scribe. Because what I want to move us to is the fact that abolitionism and justice is not about flipping of the script. Liberation, justice, excuse me, and accountability. I'm going to pause and get a sip of water. Again, liberation, justice, and accountability. And ultimately, abolitionism isn't about rebranding systems of oppression and or black supremacy. However, even looking at these images, I doubt any of us can actually fathom our orientation any other way, right? And as I pause, I think about simply noticing and understanding what these images feel like in my body and what I'm experiencing when I see them. And if I'm being honest with you, they don't connect for me. Like there's no affect, there's no emotion. There's very little there. It's almost as if it means what it should mean, and that's just outright parody. because I'm indoctrinated in the same world that you are, and I can't imagine, right? I can't imagine this to even be reality. And I say that because I want to make sure that you know that abolitionist worldviews is not about revenge or domination or more violence. But I wanted to give you an image of, can you even imagine if you came from a people who came from people who had structure, religion, culture, family, food, ties, networks, crowns, and jewels, and you were kidnapped, excised, invited even into whiteness, stripped of your own heritage, separated from your own families, constantly surveilled, constantly policed, constantly told you were less than human. W.E.B. Du Bois calls that a dual consciousness. So, can you imagine a world without policing, criminalizing, controlling, and containing Black bodies? Can you imagine that world? Abolitionists do, and abolitionists have always. And we believe in dreaming and practicing a world where accountability is seen as responsibility, a world where carcerality no longer exists, a world where we have reckoned with our traumatic histories, a world where basic needs and support are provided without taking it to the streets, without advocacy, without protest, without resistance, a world where humanity is uplifted and honored. And yes, yes, a world without cops and terroristic ways of policing anybody's that don't meet the standard of whiteness. And when you truly ask yourself this one question, have our efforts at preventing child abuse, as an example, have they worked? And how do we know? Do the cops truly keep us safer? And if they do, who do they keep safe? And who benefits from them? And why? And what are we safe from? What are we safe from? The cops or those individuals who have been deemed criminal? Because if we go back to the American dream game for just 1 second, we individually don't believe that this young Black man is actually slow. At least since 2020, you've gotten a glimpse of what I'm talking about. So this isn't new to you. But at the same time, we must ask ourselves the question, do we believe that this young man or boy is responsible for Jim Crow laws, denial of voting rights, the advent of KKK, redlining, poor schools? Or do we believe that we have always affirmed action for white bodies in these Americas, and that what we are prescribing this young man are as a result of historical and contemporary inequities? Or we probably really need to ask ourselves, do I believe that Black bodies are as able as any other body? And why am I more intrusive? Why do I surveil them more? Why do I police them more? Do I believe that there's something wrong with them? These are questions when you confront yourself that you can begin to ask. And maybe then you'll see that actually the data says that 43% of children experience physical, sexual abuse in foster care, greater than the general population. But we don't talk about those abuses, do we? And so when I think about pulling from abolition, I want us to think about a couple of things. That we're not talking about anarchy, that we even ask ourselves the same question. How do we create a world that actually promotes safety and accountability for all people? How do we resist state violence? How do we embrace our rights to liberty, to justice, to freedom? How do we say no sometimes? You're not coming in my damn house just to look through my cupboards. Abolition is not just about a process of dismantling or erasure or an absence, a lack, a nothing, right? It's a luscious process of imagining and fulfilling the world with what we want instead of policing and punishment, as Ruth Gilmore describes it. Abolition is presence in us, and it begins with how we talk to ourselves, how we talk and punish ourselves. An abolitionist vision means that we must build models today that can represent how we want to live in the future. It means developing practical strategies for taking small steps that move us toward making our dreams real and that lead us all, not some, all. And this ain't the same as all lives matter. This means all bodies access to justice, liberation, and belonging. Lead us all to believe that these things really could be done differently. So do you believe that things could really be done differently? It means actually living this vision today. And so instead of asking yourself, how do we get there? Ask yourself first, what world do you want to live in? And start practicing it now. And what I mean by practicing it now, see, small is all, and small is good. All we got is small. It's always been small steps toward, small steps toward. When we're in a conversation with somebody and we're really building culture as a group and we're being trustworthy and brave and all of these things, that gets replicated at the policy level. Right now, the policies are bogus. We've done them. We've made massive changes, and we still see the same results. What we want to see in policy has to be replicated at the smallest and the most minute interactions with each other. We have to start practicing abolition in our bodies and with each other. It's a practice, not a perfect. And if we can do that day in and day out, I guarantee you the next 20 years we write a policy at the federal level, even, it will replicate what was done at the small. The dreaming muscle has to be built. My ancestors dreamt this world. My ancestors believe in abolition, and they said that people thought that it was the worst idea of the day. Remember, anything that has to do with love, humanity, and justice for all is always going to get resistance because it's going to require white bodies to give up something and not be afraid to spend it. To spend the whiteness is already situated for you. You can spend it, it's going to come back. And I'm not talking about dollars. I'm talking about your fear, your false fragility. I'm talking about growing in bravery. We don't want people we love, work with to shrink themselves. I want all bodies from an abolitionist perspective to be big, but not to be centered. To be big and not to be easily rattled. To be big so that sometimes I know that I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with people who believe that their liberation is tied to mine. And we can only achieve this through a process of exploring how to be in right relationships with each other and the world around us. It therefore requires us to unlearn, unmake colonialism, unmake racial capitalism, unmake ableism, unmake his heteropatriarchy, unmake imperialism, in order to make a world where policing and punishment are no longer possible, not required to manufacture and uphold existing systems of economic, political, and social devastation and domination. This, my good people, is why we say justice, racial justice is prevention. It is prevention. We got to chop the root, and we have to understand it. And sometimes it just requires us to stay in the funk. So I want you to think about the role that you're practicing for racial justice. And in a 2-day follow-up, we're going to send you a link to this amazing guide to allow you to understand what your role is in a social change ecosystem. And I know I'm running out of time here. I promised you 15 minutes, but y'all know I couldn't even do that. I practiced, but I didn't make it. But we have guides, weavers, experimenters, frontline, visionaries, builders, caregivers, disruptors, healers, and storytellers. If you take this as a whole, you realize that when you are in a social change group or social change organization, you ain't got to do every damn thing. You are good at responding. That's what you're good at. Some people are good at being a visionary. That's what you're good at. Some people know how to build. That's what you're good at. Give care, disrupt, heal, storytell, guide, weave, etc. See, this helps you understand from movements of the days of yore how we got to civil rights. See, we didn't get to civil rights because everybody was a visionary. We only know about King or Malcolm, right? We don't know about all of the other foot soldiers that took the code and did their work. King didn't create a way to get flyers to Massachusetts. Stokely Carmichael didn't necessarily give the care to the wounded and the sit-ins, but somebody did. See, we all play a role in this ecosystem, and when you know yours, you might be able to show up a little bit differently. So I care for you, and I hope you care for me, but that's what I need you to do. And the last question I'm going to leave you with is, are you also tending to the damage that white supremacy has done to you? And if you are tending to that damage and you are asking, is what I'm doing changing the conditions for people to live and thrive? Then you don't have to declare yourself abolition or anti-racist. Just be about it, good people. And that's my spiel for today. And I will leave all loops open because there's no such thing as closure. We feel like we don't have to come back to it. I'm going to leave this open. You can find me if you want to chop it up. I'm willing to do that. If you want to be in right relationship, I'm willing to do that. If you got questions you need answered, I'm willing to do that as well. So I am going to pause with 2 minutes to go and say thank you for the conversation.
Corey, I have no words. You're so powerful. I'm just sitting here going, okay, how can I take this back to my leadership to make actual change here at the state level? I don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to thank all of our partners here, California Training Institute, the CAP Center, all of the speakers that we had, all of our panelists. We can't do this on our own, just like we can't create that change and prevent child abuse on our own. So I just want to reinforce the importance of breaking down those silos, thinking of those differing perspectives, and thinking of the populations of focus that you want to serve. I just thank you, all of you, for taking time to be here and listen and participate. And I hope that this was informative for you. We will appreciate all feedback. We will be here again next year on Wednesdays from 11 to noon with another CAP Month webinar series. Thank you all and have a great and fantastic week.
Thank you all just for the invitation. I appreciate it.